gain nothing from wasting time, and I might as well be saying something while I turn this on and test the audio. Oh, and I might. Okay. And forget that I'm showing what I'm showing everything. Oh no. Either way, um, I should preface this with this was going to be. And there's a car beeping hella loud right now. This was going to be a Valentine's Day special, um, for a lot of reasons, but a lot of it had to do with just a particular brand of stuff that's going on in our world today. So we're gonna talk about MGTOW, incel community. Just gonna call them weaponized fembots. Weaponized fembots. Dating scene. This relates to, so me including dating scene. You have to recognize that I'm seeing this from a perspective of the eugenicist movement, and by that I mean these people still exist, right? There's still this perpetual agenda of making sure that people don't procreate, and at least they decided to overall in the whole world maintain a very low birth rate. So we have to account for these things because they do bleed into our reality. They bleed into the decisions that we make as a whole, as a people. Da 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 da. So just keep that bear in mind. That's all I'm trying to say. Because what did I even name the stream? Conversation as a weapon, right? Conversation, what we portray as a weapon. Because I guess I should write this down. A phrase that I love, and it always comes back to me. It always comes down to this level of interplay in just our everyday lives, right? The heirs, the airs we like to play. You know, usually you would hear this kind of word said in something like, why put on airs? Or it's in the line of why why put on airs? No. Sounds weird when you're not actively in the, if you don't read fantasy, or if you don't read kind of like stories that are written from like a medieval perspective, or I want to say like an old English perspective, the word heirs kind of doesn't really mean much. It's kind of lost in translation actually when I think about it. So Japanese quote masks. There's a really great Japanese quote that I could use. Quote marks? No. No. Ooh, what am I doing? No. Quote about masks people wear. I don't know why I put wears. Let's see if I can find it. Putting the word masks. Where? Japanese. Oh, yeah, here it is. The Japanese say you have three faces. The first face you show to the world. The second face you show to your close friends and family. The third face you never show anyone. It is the truest reflection of who you are. And this goes into a Machiavelli quote of people rarely experience who you are. Yeah, this is the Machiavelli quote. Everyone sees what you appear to be. few experience what you really are. This was written by Niccolo Machiavelli, somebody whose work has transcended his life and kind of is the staple, not just the staple, it's literally the pin. It's one of the foundation blocks of modern day politics. But back to the quote. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are, which goes back to the Japanese quote, which says, the Japanese say you have three faces, right? We have ways of showing who we are as people and how we portray that out into the public, right? These are consistent dynamics that are at play in our reality, and you can't just ignore it. You can't just say, nah, well, not everybody does this. No, everybody fucking does this. Everybody. Like, the moment kids learn that they can act one way in school but act a completely different way in front of their parents, it's at play. I saw this growing up when I was working at a high school, when I was working in the schooling system in general. You could always see that kids were doing this. What's to say that some people can't get good at this, right? At putting on airs, on putting on a mask, on playing different parts of people's selves. And I think it also gets lost in translation with the weaponized fembots, and they call it multiple personality disorder. In reality, I can't even word what I want to say because that'll get me into trouble, but to some degree, we have to recognize that it is not that you have multiple personalities. It is not that you're pulling from some other self that you have within you. It's just the fact that you're playing a different part in your life. If you act one way towards one person and if you act a different way towards another person, it's not multiple personality disorder the way that kind of television likes to portray it. It's just the fact that these are just internalized learned behaviors that people kind of tend to act out, especially if they've allowed themselves to fully unravel that sort of like mental headspace, it's like a muscle, right? The more you use it, the more you can flex it. It's a different part. But so when I'm talking about people today and weaponized conversation and conversation as a weapon, I'm mainly talking about the airs we portray. I'm talking about the masks we tend to put on ourselves, and we live out these I don't want to say dynamics, but personalities, one thing, another, I don't know. Either way. So people, dating scene, weaponized fembots, incel, MGTOW. The incel and the MGTOW thing. Now, these two come from just backlash. Backlash towards something that even the females don't necessarily understand. And that is, all right, so to combine, how would I do this? This backlash, the real name of it is social interplay. The social interplay comes primarily from viewing the way we communicate through each other, or the way we communicate to one another. It comes from like, either you're in a naive headspace and you don't necessarily understand how people could play you and take you for a trip, or not being able to read between the lines of like why people are saying what they're saying, how they're saying it, how they're kind of pitching you the idea, right? Like this whole thing, like it's an interplay that exists between men and women. The problem here that's arisen from this backlash is not being naive. And in this naiveness, whatever we want to call this, it's essentially that men don't know how to communicate with women, and vice versa. And vice versa, right? This plays both ways. Women don't understand men, and men don't understand women. Did I say that right? I don't know. Either way, they just don't understand each other. With that lack of understanding, somebody always comes out the victor, or someone's always the playing field isn't even, is what I'm trying to say. In this dynamic, in conversation, there is no equal ground. How would I draw this? All right, like drawing a little scale. Like this, just to switch it to red real quick. This does not exist. This concept is not allowed to exist at all, because the way we've been conditioned. All right, this. I know this sounds incredibly weird, but the way we've been conditioned to communicate with one another, and the way we've been conditioned to not just communicate but how to deal with one another, it comes from, I give you this, you give me this. And it's not to say that a friendship can't exist out of this dynamic. It's just there's never an even playing field when you consider men and women. And it's not from a bad place. It's just that with the way the conditions of reality have been set for these last 40 years, it's created this new ambiance of give and take dynamic. I'm not saying that it's irreversible. I'm not saying that there are no good people. I'm just saying that as it is right now, and as we've been conditioned these last, I want to say from the 1930s. So 70, 80, 90, right? Like 90 years. For these last 90 years, things have really, we're in a different place. We can romanticize what we had in the days of old, but even then, like, that was still naive, because there still wasn't this consideration that people could pull the wool over your eyes and you could be tricked. So there's this. So where I'm getting at this is the MGTOW and the incel community are born from the weaponized fembots. And, not to degrade females that way, but a lot of modern ideology that's being kind of fed to females right now is weaponizing them in a way where they don't realize that they're having discordance, and there's a lot of chaos born from the way they're viewing reality. I'm not saying that there is no inequity, inequality, like whatever word they want to throw at me. Like, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, you've been taught by your professors and this institution that you idolize, that you claim as a point of authority. You've idolized them to such a degree that you've become the Christian, right? You've become that Christian who's on the corner with the megaphone. You've become that blind religious zealot, because you're no longer looking at it from a perspective of logical, if your argument is logical in any way, you're looking at it from a perspective of idolization. It's like the religious zealot, right? You're looking at it from a place of belief, not a place of how does the math work out. That's all I'm saying. The fault is not with the people. The fault is not with the feminist. The fault is with the education system. But if that leap gets made and it's shown that weaponized fembots come from the schooling institute, well, you run into a whole other problem. You have to acknowledge government involvement. You have to acknowledge a variety of things. Lobbies, lawyers, writers, thinkers. By thinkers, I mean, like, you need that secluded populace that we would call, like, the philosophers of this field, the philosophers of this, like, new school of thought movement and all this other garbage. But, right, grants, all of this has one bigger problem, and that's something that nobody likes to acknowledge. Actually, that's too big. Agenda. At some point in time, this had to be thought of. It had to be devised. There had to be a meeting where they were addressing a new form of curriculum, a new form of thought process, and they had to acknowledge government assets in money, teachers, schools of philosophy, what textbooks would get taught. This would have happened to some degree, and you'll never see anybody in the sphere kind of make that distinction that it's not the feminist problem. It's not their fault. It's not the teacher's fault. It's not the union's fault. There is a much larger, not much larger. It's just there are people who decided to make these decisions. And the people who decided to make these decisions are the people who, by and large, are the ones responsible for the current, what do you want to call it? The current way people are dealing with one another. Either way. That's just the schooling aspect, so either way. Conversation, unequal. I guess where these two things kind of come from, where I want to talk about the backlash and weaponized femmes, is the fact that it's kind of funny. I like I just as a joke, I wanted to be like, women are superior, but not in the way you think. It's more of the fact that they have the advantage in the social paradigm, right? Like, beep beep. How do I spell women? Woman. Why can't I learn how to spell? Either way, women are essentially crowned victors in the social paradigm. But that's just because we still have values from a world of the old. And as long as you're blind to this, as long as you don't make this connection, you're allowed to exist. Nobody gives a damn. Like, nobody will give a fuck if you can recognize this. But it's not inherently a bad thing. Like, these conditions came about because there's like levels to it, right? Biological, social standing wise, all this other shit. Like, there's all this. I don't know how to describe this. Women, social paradigm, whatever. Point is, they just have the advantage, right, in the social paradigm. But that, when it comes down to courting, dating, mating. We'll leave it at that. These are the three basic things, right? We went from courting to dating to mating. That's where we're at now in our present day. But so with the distinction of these things, the way it is now, this is why women have the advantage. Because at one point in time, it was about courting. That's not where we're at now. In dating, you could say that they had the advantage to some degree, but it's a give and pull take situation, because dating in a time where it was still, I don't want to say naive, but innocent, like, there's no problem when it's operating from a place of authenticity, but that authenticity is based in like people being themselves and not putting on faces, right? Not putting on airs, not pretending to be something that they're not, right? In those scenarios. So dating has a two-way street where it's kind of where like some women absolutely dread like dating somebody and then making it long term with that person, and then later finding out that this person wasn't what they really thought they were like. So, right, marrying the person that you didn't know who he really was or who she really was, etc., etc. But again, that gets more into this not being equal, right? The interplay between men and women is not equal. But it also comes down to the fact that people have been hijacked. Right? This is where I want to really get into. which is hijacking expectations and conversations. Right? Back to this. And now, mating, there are two sides of this aisle, and I've acknowledged both of them, where some guys say that the mating is dictated by the women, but the women will say, I was naive, or I wasn't aware, or X, Y, or Z, right? There's a string of logic that makes sense of that. And a lot of it operates from the fact that just the same way guys have that part of them where if they're confronted with the situation, a lot of guys can't say no. So it kind of works the inverse way, where if a woman or a girl, because this mainly happens to when they're younger, when they don't have that distinction of recognizing that this isn't a good idea, but I'm feeling hot and heavy, like they just roll with it. And they don't necessarily realize what the backlash is, right? There are backlashes to decisions. And some of them won't display themselves immediately, right? That's why the curve of learning all this is much more immediate from a guy's point of view, and it's much more out in the distance in the female's perspective. Because for a guy's reality of this, it going wrong is him impregnating a girl. For a girl's version of this, yes, getting pregnant. But how are you viewing that pregnancy? Are you viewing that as a way to have one up on the guy? Or are you viewing that as this was a mistake? And a lot of the times, because you control mating, and you're mating with people that you immediately want, right? There's this whole thing of getting immediate gratification. And anytime you're in that circumstance, there's a reason why you wanted that immediate gratification. The guy was hot, this, that. He had this or that, and I wanted this or that. Whatever, doesn't matter. Point is, the ball's still in your court, mainly because you get to dictate the life of that child. There's other levels to it, especially with how much contraception there is, etc., etc. There's levels to this. I'm not going to draw just a blanket statement and be like, this is the definitive way of looking at this. No, there's much more interplay. I'm just really paraphrasing this really quickly because of where we're going next. Now, when men and women are having a conversation, right? When they're having this conversation, this is kind of weird to say, but when they're having this conversation, the men from the ages of, we could say 18 to 24, they're completely oblivious. They don't fucking understand any of this, right? The majority of them, actually. We can go much lower than this. Let's go with 13. There's a reason for this. Because this demographic has changed over the years with the ease of corn, with the ease of access to certain kind of materials, with them having friends, with the way schooling life kind of is. One way or another, there's so much of this material in existence that it is more prevalent to younger and younger men being exposed to what the use of your genitalia is. I'll leave it at that. And for females, they learn this way quicker. It's kind of fucked up to say, but I've met a lot of people in my lifetime that have described to me that oh fuck, I didn't even want to say that, because there is this fucked up joke that says if the age isn't on the clock, I don't even remember, but it's kind of the same thing. 13 to 18, sometimes younger. Now, remember, I'm talking about naivety. In this scenario, in this demographic, in this social age, demographic. I'm talking about naivety or being naive. How long does the novel experience last? And the novel experience here is the emotions, the butterflies in the stomach, the feeling of love, the feeling of this, XYZ, etc., right? All of that dies out pretty quickly for females. For men, the delusion will remain there forever. Like, for fucking ever. Like, I personally didn't even break out of my naivety towards the female sex until I was 27. Give or take 27. But that was because I had encountered somebody who was leagues above the mental head games that a lot of other females are playing. But because she was playing this game hard as fuck on me. But at the same time, I recognized that this isn't, it's not that I knew it wasn't normal. It was more the fact that, like, I could tell something wasn't right. Something was way off, like way the fuck off, because I don't know how to say this, but I just pay a lot of attention to people's, I'm pretty aware. But for me to see somebody else be uber aware, like be more aware than I'm aware, I was like, okay, something ain't right here. What's going on? And by being aware is just paying attention to people's social cues, paying attention to how people interact with others, paying attention to, like, how they say certain things, how they act with certain people. Like, it was a defense mechanism that I developed, but I don't know either way. So back to this naive experience. And this naive experience primarily kind of arises with, we call it naive love. Or naive love, or attraction. We'll just call it novel love. Novel love. Because, you know, novels, stories, fantasy, that sort of shit. So, in this stage of being naive and in love, females from the ages of 13 to 18 are primary targets for all of these boys, right? All of these guys from this age group have seen movies. They've seen like, oh, is this what love is supposed to be like? Well, I want to have this experience, or I want to do this with this girl, or right? And these expectations of life come from a variety of different places. They come from friends, movies, friends, movies. Actually, instead of movies, I'm just going to use media, because nowadays there's more than just Netflix. There's more than just movie theaters. There's everything under the sun, from manga, anime, to comics, to whatever weird fan fiction we could talk about. And don't ever go into the fanfic section. Fan fiction breeds some of the most. I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to go there anymore. Either way, fanfic. But friends, media, there is a variety of different levels that men will develop this sort of kind of like expectation of life, right? They'll assume that love should be this way. Love feels like X, right? Fill in the dot, whatever. Love feels like X. And during this whole time, while all of these men are trying and attempting to get past the defenses of females, it leaves them only one thing to. It leaves them in a precarious situation where they have to adapt to circumstances. S, right? Yeah. such a dummy sometimes. They have to adapt to their circumstances. And in adapting to their circumstances, well, this is where the fucked up part comes in. This is kind of where the feminazi and the feminist movement kind of was born from. Was in adapting to these circumstances, they needed to adopt a few ways of dealing with this, which is healing, which is kind of like the preferred method of all this. And by healing, it's understanding. Not all circumstances are equal. I'm not saying that everybody can heal from everything. I'm just saying it's an aspect, and it's a thing that we can interact with in our lives, and to some degree, it can help. Okay, but in adapting to circumstances, some people go cold. They go bitter. Resent is a word that comes to mind, but in a lot of them, and at least in the modern situation, it's called game. Or, what do you call it when like a cat has a mouse and they're like just toying with the mouse? Like, it's not like a game of prey, because that's not what a lot of these females do. It's just a game that they play. It's like hunting, or what we call the chaser and the pursuer dynamic. Pursuer? I don't know. Chaser pursuer dynamic. So, with all of these men always attempting their shots at the females, they adapt to their circumstances. This kind of doesn't exist. Cold, bitter resentment, or game hunting, and then the chaser-pursuer dynamic. Usually what happens here is, between the ages of 30 and plus, this is where this kind of comes in, right? And when it's fun and it's a game, that's between the ages of 18 to 27. Kind of weird and kind of fucked up. It's just the way the game plays out, because essentially and eventually these men will stop chasing. And the more these groups dwindle for each respective female, the more it becomes relevant and apparent to them that something's off. Some are smart enough to recognize this, a lot aren't. But adapting to circumstances. Naive love. Which, essentially, when all this happens, it happens so early in the lives of these females that real love eventually dwindles. It just kind of phases out. Like, it just doesn't exist anymore because everything's been said to them. They've been through everything. Like, if it wasn't the one guy, it's one of the other guys that said X, Y, or Z, or that did X, Y, and Z, or it's just the novelty of falling in love disappears, because to them it's just different guy, different things that are said, and it eventually becomes just a blur. And because they start nitpicking from the experiences of previous dealings or previous relationships, they develop this like laundry list of things that they would want to see in a partner, but it falls to the wayside. Either way, I think I've gotten way too lost in trying to just explain this. But so the naivety of love is kind of destroyed in the way that things are now. And people want to say, on both sides of the aisle, that love can still exist. Not really. As long as people are the way that they are, and as long as our society worships and takes for granted. No. As long as our society is playing out the way it's playing out, we're still going to see more to come from all of this. And not to say that it can't change. It's just, it'd be too naive to say that it could be fixed in any quick manner. Because a lot of this comes down to like social expectations, the advice that we can give to the young. But that dynamic has been broken, right? Like, you can't most of the times, you like young kids, young people, anybody under the age of 27, you can give them solid advice, but they won't take it, right? It just takes too long for the inertia of them trying to like learn what you're trying to tell them. It just takes too long to take place. And they'll just usually make the same mistake over and over again, and until it becomes really apparent to each individual. And that's just too long. Too long. You have a better fucking shot watching molasses move. But either way. Novel love. Now, hijacking expectations and conversations. Now, there is something to be said about naiveness. Naiveness? I don't even know. Naivety? Whatever. Because this was something that I had spoken about previously, where this doesn't necessarily exist in how we view each other as friends or how we view each other as individuals. Because in reality, there's already been like a sort of hijacking in people's expectations of others, because we have world building aspects. It's kind of difficult to explain. But what I mean by world building aspects, I mean there are these influential key figures in our lives that will shape the world and the reality around us. And a good example of this is school. You learn history. You deal with others. Whatever little experience that you get from the social dynamic aspect of things, with the people that you deal with those that you see every day, it builds expectations into you. And they're irreversible, like absolutely irreversible. I still have certain tics that I've learned from some of my schools that I was only there for 6 months. And I to this day will still use certain words that I only learned at that time, because it shaped my reality to some degree, because of the experiences I had, or because the friendships that I fostered. Right? There's levels to these things. So that's just school. Now, beyond school, we have, in a weird way, I want to say media, but media in terms of the news. Because at least this goes more for my generation, because we would still have to watch through commercials to get back to our show that we were watching. So you would get urgent news broadcast, right? They would interrupt the show that you were watching, and you were forced in a situation where you had to watch whatever the fuck the TV station programmers were kind of feeding at that hour. It's kind of why I was able to watch 9/11. I think I was watching The Simpsons or something, and just urgent news, Twin Towers, this and that, like, right? Not every kid, not every person, but to some degree, if this doesn't permeate through the reality of you watching the television, it permeates through other people, right? Because it'll be the talk of the office. It'll be the talk of the classroom, or it'll be the talk of, you'll hear it through a variety of different avenues in your daily life. It'll just come to you, right? But people are kind of the main perpetrator, or the main delivery device of this world building aspect thing. Now, we also have history, right? And the reason why I'm just adding history here, even though school's right here, is because in a weird way, it's a story, but because you call it history, it just validates itself. Like you don't have to look in a book. You don't have to look and research if what this person told you, that if this was accurate or not. No, you just call it history. Like, this is just what happened in previous times, that nowadays people don't give a fuck. Like, they'll just accept it and be like, all right, cool. That's my people's history. All right, cool. We'll leave it at that, without without looking at what the nuance of it was. There's always a nuance. I always love like researching these topics because I always learned that there were nuances to what I was reading. Like, right? The Spanish, like, right? So people will say that the Spanish were evil people and da 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 da, and Mexico's history and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, they were fucking brutal. Like, no doubt about it. Like the Inquisitor way of handling riots was very brutal. And they did shed a lot of blood. But one of the nuances that I loved about looking into Spanish history was the fact that, like, they were the only group of Europeans that debated the Catholic Roman Church into giving proof that other people could have souls. Like, it's a weird debate. It's a weird conversation piece, but the Spanish at one point in time refused to kill certain natives because they would look at the Catholic Church and they'd be like, but by your own doctrine, these people aren't savages. These people have reason. These people can exercise, I can't remember what the word was, but like equity of oneself, or like, there was like a self-reliance component that they were trying to debate. And because the Bible had said these things, they were like, these people have souls. And like, kind of put the Catholic Church in a weird position where they were like, fuck, we can't kill them because it's scripture. And then the Spanish were like, damn fucking right, like, we schooled you. And then the Vatican was like, well, we'll stop supporting you. And then eventually the Spanish lost control of Mexico through other means, right? There's history, like, the reality of the history is much different from the history that you're told, because there is something to gain here, right? And this goes into putting on airs, being told a story through a particular set of lenses. So, lens, right? There are different kind of lenses. They all have different focal points. They all have different gradations, which allow them to view reality through a different numerical value of how, right? Do you see far? Do you see close? Etc. Etc. Either way. So naivety doesn't exist. This is a fallacy. And by fallacy, I kind of want to get into this, is the fact that because we have these world building aspects in our lives, the concept of free will is thrown out the window. There is no such thing as free will. Your life will be dictated by the environment that you're in. 100%. And actually it'll be like 98.999%, whatever. But the reality of the situation is the culture that you're nurtured in is the real 100%. The culture takes control of the rest of this. And by culture, I mean the cultural identity aspect of things. Because you will look out to your reality as a kid and you'll identify with certain things. And because you've made that connection and you've made that attachment, you will no longer, like, I don't understand the psychology behind it, but there's a hard wire that is forever plugged into somebody's brain. And trying to get them to acknowledge that is a whole fucking process. It's like a whole bag of worms that you have to, like, you can't pry people from it because they've created their entire identity, persona, lifestyle around this connection that they make. And that connection always starts in school, because it's either the people that they're around, the experiences that they develop, or just whatever the teacher says and whatever they've decided to view as being the authentic thing. It's kind of it's a difficult thing for me to explain. So you've already been hijacked. People are just hijacked from the beginning. Like, there's nothing you can do. Even homeschooling, like, there is no such thing as free will, like, in any circumstances. And to think that you can achieve that is beyond ludicrous. I don't even know if I could make an argument for free will existing in this sort of whatever. So yeah, free will is kind of false. I was gonna put fake and kind of, kind of that word, but whatever. World. So and it's kind of funny, right? To not understand this makes you it really makes you naive, completely naive to not understand that your world was completely shaped from inception. Not to cast shade on parents, but it's just the nature of the infrastructure that we've developed and we've allowed to kind of take control over everything, from our schools to our unions to our academic social circles, so on and so on and so on. And it gets worse when you look at the money and where some of these influences originated from and how long some of these influences have kind of just allowed themselves to guide human reality. It just gets too much. So there's this naive experience that we're all having, and we're unaware to the con, or con men and con women with men, or either way. There are people who are always trying to shape reality into something else. There's always this new trend. There's always this new way of looking at life. There's always this new philosophy, this new worldview. There's this new thing to experience, or there's this new thing to live your life through. Well, that's what I call these the con men and the con women of the world, because they understand that people are so devoid of meaning that they have to hijack. All right, this is where it comes into this hijacking between con men, con women, and hijacking this process is called novelty. I know, right? There's this whole use of the word novel, but novelty comes in the experience of lacking, kind of want to say lacking history, but not lacking history in the sense of reading a book, but lacking history in the sense of there's nothing new under the sun. There's always a way of, there's always, right? It's like when they say that The Simpsons did it first, or Family Guy did it, or this or that. It's like humanity has existed for a very long time. And I'm not talking about the Vatican friendly human history. I'm talking about actual human history has been around for a long time. Concepts, ideas, all sorts of things have either been thought up of once, and if it hasn't been thought of yet, just right now, somebody thought about it, right? There's this whole nature of there's enough of us in the world that either you come out with the idea or someone else does. And then you'll by off chance look through a history book and be like, whoa, somebody had this idea forever ago. Kind of like VR goggles, right? People think it's novel. It's no. The first iteration of that was 1920, but whatever. Hijacking comes from the idea of it being a novelty, it being worth something experiencing, without realizing that there are con men, con women, and the abuse of the fact that there is this naivety that people kind of exuberate. So, because a lot of humanity will live life in such a vicarious way of assuming, not even assumption, this whole thing that I'm trying to describe just doesn't come from assuming something. It comes also from the fact that you just don't know. You just don't know everything that's out there. And because there is this lack of knowing, of experience, you just fall into the same scheme. right? We call it a pyramid scheme, or we'll call it you right. You were just told a lie. You've believed the lie for so long, right? Like how some people will believe that Santa Claus is real up until they're 15, and then eventually somebody breaks the news to them, and they're just like, "What?" Right? Like that level of shock of reality is kind of what I'm trying to describe here. And right back to the world building aspect of things, because world building, world building systems. How do I describe this? There are systems in play that either knowingly or unknowingly, I think that's the way to say it, knowingly or unknowingly, they create expectations in people. And because these expectations exist, how do I say this? Man, the concept that I'm trying to reach for is really escaping me here. So, I think a great example that I can use here is holidays. Holidays. Yeah, let's go with Valentine's Day. Oh my god. And people don't even know about Saint Valentine. Oh, dude. This is intense. So, Valentine's Day comes from Saint Valentine. Good looking chap. Been associated with the tradition of quarterly love. I can't remember. Epilepsy and beekeepers. Very interesting. Valentine's story. Signed a letter from your Valentine to his jailer's daughter, who he had befriended and healed from blindness. Another common legend states that he defied the emperor's orders and secretly married couples to spare the husbands from war. I don't know about the truth about all this, but this is what I do remember from growing up. Was he essentially signed a letter and was like, your Valentine, and this is just a long kept tradition. But Valentine's Day, main thing that we all associate with this is the dreaded L word, love. And right, when just me saying that word brought up either positive emotions or negative emotions, because there are expectations that you've experienced in life that either bring out these two sides of the coin, right? But love has been iterated through songs, movies, well, back in the old days, novels, kind of word to mouth stories. Because I grew up with some of these. Because being around, like, a single mom, always traveling with her, I've heard a lot of stories that her friends had, or families or relatives had. So like, there is this kind of like interplay dynamic that we have where we secretly kind of like hearing other people's like stories in life. So either way, but the reality of this, right? We would like to assume that some of these more fuzzy, comfortable aspects of life are what they are. It comes with the drawback that yes, there is love, but there is also the physical component of this. Component. Whatever. Which is the biochemistry reactions. I'm like degrading love so badly right now. The biochemistry aspect of things. And how to some degree, the physical component is just us confusing baby making, or baby making. We're confusing these two things, baby making and the bio component of love. And like, basically, these two things are just endorphins. That's all I'm trying to say. Endorphins, whatever. And like with any drug, or like with anything that aids or anything that gives to the human experience, sometimes people tend to abuse the fuck out of it. Like, it's just a drug, right? Eventually, it stops being just a physical component. It stops being a biochemistry component. It stops being about making babies, and it starts being more about the adrenaline, the endorphins, or the high that we get from this whole thing, which is kind of why I included the chaser pursuer dynamic over here. Now, hijacking expectations. Because we think of love, we think of what we've heard in songs, we think of what we've heard in movies. But the more that you look at love through the lens of novelty and through the lens of naivety, through being naive, through being innocent, through not understanding that other people can have other intentions, right? Like, there's that distinction. The younger you are, the more you're susceptible to being naive in making certain decisions, because you think of love. You think of what you've heard in songs. You think of what you've seen in movies. And through operating in that place of naivety, you make a decision to give in to the physical component of things. But when you give into the physical component of things, did you determine what the intention was from the other party? And this is why you'll hear a lot of times that, oh, I was tricked, or I was too young, I didn't understand. And to some degree, they're not lying. They're really not lying. Like, they really did not understand that them making those decisions when they were younger was going to affect their overall life, because they didn't realize, or at least no one warned them, that sometimes people just lie to get what they want. That goes for the ladies too. Sometimes you're just saying that just to say it, like, because you heard some other bitch say it, and like, you're like, oh, that shit sounds good, I should use that as an excuse. Not everybody, but you know, I kind of realize that there's two kind of people in this world, half full and half empty. But either way. So, right, there are systems that created this idea of what love is. And it's not to say that there's this grand scheme of like, right? There's like a genius songwriter who's like writing all these love songs, and he's like, I'm gonna break the whole world's heart. Like, that's not how it played out. It's just that naivety. It's just being naive. You just don't know. Like, there's this whole thing of like, it sells. And it sells, right? Like, songs like this, movies like this, romance comedy movies just sell. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. Each 5 or 10 years, there's a new demographic. There's a whole new wave of kids that you can sell garbage to. You can sell them a movie. You can sell them an experience. That's not the problem here. It's more than them being naive in making decisions, which is kind of why it's important to destroy the family dynamic. Right? Destroying the trust between a brother and sister, destroying the trust between father and daughter, mother and son, and then destroying the trust between mom and dad, or at least not allowing these sort of like components to exist in people's lives. Because the more naive people you have, the more that you could sell the novel experience to. It has to do with more marketing and selling things and all this other shit. But either way, that's just the holidays. I'm just looking at Valentine's Day. When you look at any of the other holidays, they're less consequential. So like Easter, Um, it's another holiday I haven't fucking celebrated. Christmas is another one. They're all involved with selling something. None of what the tradition is matters. None, like, right, all the important fluffy shit just got tossed out the window, and it's like, hey, buy some plastic eggs and fill them up with some fucking candy that's terrible for you. Right? Like, there's a loss of translation between these two things. And eventually, to the person who's the marketer, they're like, I don't give a fuck if people know what Easter is. I'm just gonna sell them garbage. Like, you know what I mean? It's not a great conspiracy, or it's not a great scheme. It's just there was just a class of merchants that wanted to sell you garbage. That's all there is to it. But same thing with schools, right? I remember talking in the previous videos. We're talking about how schools have a problem with textbooks, and how textbook publishers have like this revolving door dynamic with government, and getting a contract, selling them the more books, and they're not really including any new material in the books. They're just kind of reorganizing the chapters or whatever. Like, they've standardized education to such a degree that it's impossible for them to adopt a new curriculum or a new standard of curriculum, because the revolving door is more about selling books and securing contracts than it is to preparing newer generations of kids with a more, not accurate, but with the skill set that is more conducive to their growth in modern times, right? A good example of this is they don't show you how do you open up a bank account, right? Like, how do you do adult things, right? Like, none of that gets taught in schools. They usually just kind of throw you in the real world, and they're like, all right, figure it out yourself. And it's just like, well, I thought that was school was for. And they just look at you counting the money from the book sales, and they're just like, yeah, right. Either way, that's schools. Then there's, how do I even say this? Movies. Propaganda, right? The whole history of movies is propaganda based. Propaganda. A great example of this is, this dude, Kinsley. No, Alfred Kinsley. Is that his name? I have the book here. Yeah, this guy. American sexologist. This guy. Let's go to videos. What's the movie? They literally made a movie about this guy. I always love looking at it, because it's just like, dude, it has what's his face?
Hello, I'm Dr. Alfred Kinsey from Indiana University, and I'm making a study of sex behavior. What's your most common decision?
There's more than one?
I've learned that the gap between what we assume people do sexually and what they actually do is enormous.
How young were you when you first experienced hugging?
Necking.
Petting?
What did you dream about?
That's why a study of this kind is so important.
Poor Liam Neeson. Right, that was Liam Neeson, right? I'm not tripping on this, right? Yeah, Liam Neeson. Okay. Now, the movie sounds good. The topic sounds amazing. The topic sounds like, ooh, that would sound really interesting. What was that about? Well, this dude, oh man. One of my favorite things about Alfred Kinsley was, or at least one of the things that I still have no answers to, is during the height of the war, right? This is World War II. During the height of the war, when the Americans saw the Nazis as a problem, Alfred Kinsley somehow communicated to one of the highest SS officers who was in control of a camp. And not only that, but he was receiving research material from this Nazi officer who was literally abusing of a certain age demographic of people like minors. And then he was feeding this as scientific research material to Alfred Kinsley. And it's like, wait. If our countries are going to war with one another, how did he get in contact with this guy? Like, either way, right? Movies, by and large, and always, have had this effect of shaping reality. Now, yes, nowadays we have a lot of like fantasy green screen type of movies that kind of just balls to the wall. Of course, there are movies that are also made about real life, but even those are kind of fanciful, right? To like, you have somebody in a movie always getting headshots. That's not real, right? When you look at the reality of marksmanship and people shooting guns, like they pick and choose what to make fanciful, and usually it's just, better screen time, fight scenes and all this other garbage, explosions, etc. But the guy who figured out that movies as a use of propaganda was one of the most amazing things you could do was a man named Alfred Hilario. If you can read between what I'm trying to say, because I can't say that guy's name. But there's this acknowledgement that we have to acknowledge that moving pictures and movies were essentially created for propaganda use. They weren't necessarily used to tell you the whole truth. They were used to tell you a convenient truth. So, movies, it's just realistically a convenient, whatever. I'm pretty stupid. A convenient truth. Usually one that works at the behest of whoever's kind of saying it. Right? World building systems. To some degree. But movies, eventually, this form of propaganda converged into something else. The news. The news, paper, in reality, we call them journalists. Right? This all stems back to convenient truth. There's also some people like saying the name Project Mockingbird. I don't like using that example because it just flies over people's heads without recognizing that there's an internal infrastructure in a lot of publishing. That's the word that I'm looking for. So, publishing or publishing, I think they're called publishing houses. Either way, publishing houses have a very close relationships with newspapers and journalists. They also have a lot to do with textbooks, history books, and novels, both fiction and non-fiction. There's an important distinction in this, because we have to recognize that before the advent of the internet, before the advent of the electronic age, the only way for you to learn about people, the only way for you to learn about the world outside of your own area was through novels, was through fiction and non-fiction, autobiographies, or the story of the person climbing Mount Olympus. Or when you read these sort of things, it had to come from somewhere. And it was much easier during those times to control this through a publishing house, because there's something at these publishing houses is very important, which we call editors. And they like to say that they have something called integrity. Integrity. Or what I like to call aesthetic. Now, the reason why I call it aesthetic is because certain publishing houses have had a reputation of only publishing certain kind of works, right? And that's where the aesthetic comes in, right? Some publishing houses like the aesthetic of horror stories. Other publishing houses like the aesthetic of old classic works like Penguin. It's important to understand that a publishing house has an owner, or it has a directive, and that directive is going to search for editors or people who have the understanding of the interest of the company and knowing what kind of aesthetic to push out, right? What kind of theme to talk about, what they're reaching for is what I'm trying to say. Either way. Well, newspapers and journalists all have editors above them. And these editors have a boss. At the end of the day, everybody has a boss. And if you think you don't have a boss, you just haven't pissed them off enough yet to recognize that, oh, that dude's above me in this structure? Either way. Right, this goes into hijacking expectations and conversations. I haven't even gotten to the conversation part of things yet. Either way. So, everybody has an owner. Everybody has a boss. Kind of what I'm trying to get to. Knowing that there is this dynamic, and even if you don't believe that there's an owner or a boss, there is still something above these people. And it's called a board of directors. And if you don't want to call them that, we have another word for them. They're called shareholders. And when the shareholders aren't happy, things start changing really quickly. Either way. Moving on. Back to world building systems. And me explaining that there's this convenient truth that movies kind of push to, newspapers kind of push to, the journalists will kind of push to. But in reality, it's because there is this convenient truth that is always trying to be reached. It's always trying to get grasped. And people think that when you have a set structure, it's much easier to control than it is for people to think that people are free agents, right? Because there's no free agents. There's no thing. There's nothing. There is no free will. None whatsoever. And that was just me explaining it with the schools, the media systems, history, whatever. I can't say that I proved it definitively. I just made a logical argument. If you assume that there is such a thing as free will, I have a variety of ways to present to you that kind of just make that fall apart. Because you're always dictated by everybody is. I don't even want to get more into that. Either way. The convenient truth here, though, was something that was set into place not in modern times. This derived from olden times. Now, there's a reason why I'm saying it this way. People like to think that the way we view our reality is through what we learn in modern times, without recognizing that our reality, or at least the current set of circumstances of this country, were set into place. There were other people who lived on this earth that helped create this current set of circumstances. It doesn't sound crazy when you say it out loud like that, but people tend to believe that the current way things are just work fine. The way the world is right now is perfectly fine, without recognizing what they're really saying is that the way all of these previous decision makers have decided to push our modern history timeline They're right. Without recognizing that there was a lot of things that happened in our past, right? What I'm trying to get to is the luxury that America has is at the detriment of the rest of the world. We enslaved the whole world in order for America to have this bare minimum society. That's what I'm trying to really portray here. That's the convenient truth. The convenient truth in this scenario is to never let anybody recognize that America enslaved the whole world in order for it to have its bare minimum society. And the more you stray away from that, the more it's a convenient truth. So, really weird for me to say that in hijacking expectations, because everybody expects that the United States works without recognizing that by what standard, by what rule of measurement. We've never had any other rulership that we can compare it to, because ever since the turn of the century in the 1800s, there's always been this very nice guiding hand dictating how things should be done, and not just in this country. I could get more into that, but the Churchill family would not be very happy if I did that. And I think it's funny because people will be like, well, that was a family that was influential during World War II. They have nothing to do with our reality, you know? And I'm like, you must be a fucking fool. People don't just change. Power structures don't just disappear. Especially power structures that have a family and who have a very big vested interest in making sure that what their grandfather built stays alive. It's a very far out thing, but just the same way that there's traditional family mom and pop shops, well, there are some family businesses that are still running very healthily, and you would never know that. I probably lost a whole lot of people in that scenario, but either way, how much time do I have? An hour and 17. Oh, geez, this is way too long already for me. Yeah, that was just the hijacking of expectations portion, where I was just kind of glossing over that we have these expectations of how things are without recognizing that the current set of circumstances created these expectations, and when these expectations aren't met, it comes down to having this mismatch of reality and our expectations, which is how you get movements like MGTOW, the incel community, and the backlash that's kind of born from them not understanding how to communicate with the opposite sex. And it also comes from the fact that we've naively believed in this dynamic of love, right? Because a lot of men will believe that love is this thing without recognizing that love is real, it can exist, but the current set of circumstances that people have been living through have destroyed the fundamental understanding of what that emotion is or what it looks like. Because, like I've explained here, you have men who have constantly been trying to go after women. They've had to learn how to adapt. And then the adaptation in that came in this form of playing this game. And in playing this game with them, it put them in a vicarious situation that they play this game until they're 27. Then they get kicked out. And those who still haven't found a partner are just bitter and resentment over it. And men who are still stuck in this naive state past the age of 24, well, I should say 27, the women will never be happy because they recognize that they just played somebody for a fool and they can never show their true face to their partner, which is kind of where the resentment really comes in, but I didn't really explain that very well. But there's this whole interplay dynamic that eventually is born from people having their expectations hijacked. and them thinking that our world is a certain way without recognizing that there's more to it. There's always a nuance in this. And like for the men women thing that I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't really describe very well, is that women have the advantage because to them it's like looking at a mouse trying to capture and prey on a cat. Because at the end of the day, not a lot of women, but there's a good portion of them that just have seen men twist themselves backwards and forwards in all sorts of directions. And for them, it's just like, why does this always happen? Why do I always find myself in this situation where I could just toy with them? And it leaves them uninterested in a variety of other things. But at the end of the day, it's because men have this expectation of how relationships should work without recognizing that people can put on airs. People can just put on a mask and play a part. And, you know, it's both men and women, right? Because nowadays, we literally have like a 10% population of men who are just playing all the girls or playing all the women at the moment. And there's just this mismatch, and it's off balance, and you have people expecting reality to play out a certain way without recognizing that the opposite is just playing games just to get what they want. Hijacking expectations, most of it comes from your world building aspects. Schools, news, media. I didn't say friends, family, friends. From media, it also expands into like stories, fan fiction, manga, whatever form of entertainment that we tend to fall into, I guess. Yeah, I'm just gonna rewatch this video. All right, that was it.